your opinion on Trump and Vance's treatment of President Zelenskyy. I was wondering if you think that they understand the war crimes that have been committed in Ukraine, and what their opinion is, what should happen about these war crimes after the appeasement is completed. And also, do they really understand what would happen if Russia are successful in Ukraine? That these war crimes will increase on a huge basis, and Ukrainian people and infrastructure will suffer indefinitely.
OK, Alex, let's get Mr. Farage.
I mean, you talk about appeasement. I wonder, those that are objecting, and by the way, whatever the spat that occurred between Trump, Vance and Zelenskyy, let's, Alex, just look at the very, very big picture to begin with, if I can. We, after 3 years of war, after the Putin invasion, and 1 million battle casualties, almost unbelievable, isn't it? 1 million battle casualties, have a situation now where we either go for a peace deal or this continues for year after year after year. I know that Boris Johnson has been the biggest sort of proponent of total war, but the truth is, and I think, Alex, this is what Zelenskyy will have to face up to. The truth is that the longer the war goes on, the more it suits Russia. And wars either end with a deal or they end in annihilation. What is interesting, Alex, is that before Zelenskyy had left the White House, he'd realised that he had overplayed his hand. Yes, of course, they bit back at him, but he had overplayed his hand. And before Zelenskyy even left the White House, he was willing to go back in and sign the minerals deal. So I actually think, despite a lot of nonsense that you read and hear about that meeting being the end of the world, it's all going to be a disaster, all the same stuff, by the way, we heard when he talked about Little Rocket Man a few years ago, and my button's bigger than yours, which within 2 weeks he was in North Korea. I actually think good is going to come of Friday. Zelenskyy is going to sign the deal. And the real worry I've got, Alex, isn't about appeasement. It's about how do we put together a security package that absolutely makes sure that Putin can't do this again. And I think we're edging in the right direction.
Just to clarify, do you agree that the President and Vice President bullied President Zelenskyy?
I think President Zelenskyy was very unwise to tell the Americans what would happen to them if they didn't back him. I think it was unwise. Yeah, sure, Vance and Trump bit back. But I think in diplomatic terms, I think Zelenskyy played it very badly. And it's very interesting that even Peter Mandelson, the British ambassador, is making very, very similar points.
Well, he's suggesting Zelenskyy should return to Washington.
He will. And he will. Mandelson is right. And he will. I think what came out of Friday...
You don't see anything intemperate in Trump's language at all?
Whether there was or whether there wasn't, we're heading towards peace. We're heading towards peace. It's a good thing, not a bad thing. Would you treat a guest
like that?
I wouldn't expect a guest to be rude to me in my own house. Absolutely not. I would expect a guest to treat me with respect. It doesn't mean that, for a minute that Vance and Trump, I'm not defending what they did.
So you are critical of what they did, Mr. Farage?
Do we want peace?
Of course we want
Or should we spend weeks talking about what happened?
You did say you wouldn't defend what they did. So you wouldn't behave in that fashion?
I try not to.
What does that mean? So you might?
Nick, this is irrelevant. This is where we all go wrong. We're all focusing on the row that happened. Maybe the row was bound to happen anyway. Zelenskyy wasn't ready, maybe for this, and perhaps the Americans weren't ready for it either. I don't know.
Is it right a journalist asked him why he's not wearing a suit?
Well, do you know what? If I turned up at the White House, I'd make sure I was wearing a suit and my shoes were cleaned. Absolutely. And Trump is... And in diplomacy... Our Prime Minister,
Winston Churchill,
our Prime Minister, but he wasn't dealing with President Trump. Our Prime Minister was briefed as to how to deal with the visit to the White House.
But that's not Zelensky's fault, is it?
All right, if Zelenskyy wants to bowl in and show no respect to a man who we all know is incredibly old-fashioned about this stuff, and he really is.
When you say this stuff, you mean manners, dress,
very
shoes?
much so.
So your shoes have to be shined. It's like being back at school.
Lots of times, Trump said, yeah, good shoes, great shoes, whatever, That's how he... So if you're going in with a positive mindset, maybe Zelenskyy should have thought about that. But that's minor. So you are critical of him wearing his battle fatigues, effectively? I think there are times to wear it and there are times not to, perhaps.
You mentioned Keir Starmer.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, did anybody reach out to you from his team prior to that meeting with President Trump as to what might work and what might not work?
No.
How would you characterise what Sir Keir Starmer got right?
Well, he was respectful of the president. That's important. As I say, Trump is quite old-fashioned in all of these things. He really genuinely is. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing either. He was respectful. I think, do you know what's really happened over the last few days?
Tell me.
Is we've actually seen a British Prime Minister viscerally opposed to Brexit, wanting to have a second referendum, now benefiting as Prime Minister enormously from Brexit because, actually, it was really interesting that on Saturday night, Downing Street put out a statement and they said, ahead of the summit that happened yesterday in London, and Downing Street itself said, because of the UK's unique position with regards to Europe. Basically, because we're not part of the European Union, we're not tied to their foreign policy decisions in any way at all, which we were before we left. So it's been it just shows you that actually Brexit's made us stand taller on the world stage. And let's be fair, I think in terms of the White House visit, the summit yesterday, the attempt to be a broker, in a sense, between America, Europe, Ukraine. I mean, let's face it, it's been quite a good few days for him.
President Trump said Sir Keir was a tough negotiator. Is he right?
Well, I don't know what happened in that room, but this is classic of Trump, isn't it? Oh, my God, he was so tough. Whether he was or not, I don't know. I mean, look.
Is it a playbook?
Again,
does Trump have a playbook he goes to in that showdown with Zelenskyy? Is it almost like calling the plays in an American football team?
Well, I think.
I don't know. You do. You've been with him in good times and bad. That's why I'm asking.
This guy does stuff that nobody else can understand. He is unlike any other politician we've seen in modern times. He is wholly unconventional. But you know what? With these negotiations, he's always 2 or 3 moves ahead of everybody else. And that's why to comment constantly on the latest thing Trump has said or done is ludicrous. I mean, look, he called Zelenskyy a dictator, And I had the whole.
You've already addressed that.
I had the whole of the media pack. And then when he's asked about it, did I say that? Did I really? The old saying about taking him seriously but not literally is true. I'm going to repeat the point. We are close to a negotiation.
You think we're closer to peace as a result of Friday afternoon?
Very much so.
Because
Zelenskyy has had to wake up and smell the coffee, as Lord Mandelson has very clearly pointed out.
We must move on. Just lastly, there are political movements afoot that the state visit that was offered to Donald Trump should now be postponed. John Swinney, the First Minister of Scotland, and others. Your view on that?
Yeah, 1 or 2 Conservatives saying the same thing. Yeah, of course. Look, these people can't abide Trump. They can't live with Trump. They don't understand Trump. They hate Trump. They always have. And let's face it, the Foreign Secretary hates Trump. Half the Cabinet hates Trump. But they've got to face reality. And
state visit stays.
Of course it does. And look, whether you like Trump or not, it's irrelevant. He is in a very powerful position in America. We are, by the way, I don't agree with everything Trump does or says. Of course I don't. But without America, we are defenseless. And in terms of economics, if we think tying ourselves ever closer to an economically failing European Union, rather than understanding and embracing some of the things that America is doing, I think we're making a very, very big mistake.
And there have been calls from some senators suggesting that President Zelenskyy should resign. This could be the way of bringing about peace. Nigel Farage?
Well, you must have elections. That's absolutely clear.
Now?
We must have elections as soon as there is a peace deal on the table, a credible peace deal on the table. Right. Then the best way for the Ukrainian population to discuss that deal and the shape of that deal is to have an election. All right? Very, very important. It's not just for one man and the current elected parliament.
Do you think he's a roadblock now, then, in a sense, President Zelenskyy?
If I try to put myself in a really neutral position on this, it must have been psychologically very tough for him to turn up at the White House and to have to accept that that Crimea is not going back to Ukraine. That psychologically, as a leader, and that's how history shows you, can't be easy. All right. So I'm saying that from a totally neutral perspective. I'm not a huge fan of Ukraine. It's a very, very corrupt country, etc. But I do understand that there must be elections.
You're not a fan of the treatment it's receiving at the moment from Putin.
No, of course not.
No,
far from it.
Just to clarify.
Far from it. I mean, of course
So he arrives at the White House, he's not getting Crimea.
And I can see psychologically why he was in a tough place. But he wasn't able to adapt and adjust, and he got a bit shirty, and boom, the American leaders bit back. But now he's being realistic, I think that, I think both Mandelson and myself are saying, look, we just have to get real here. This has happened. The Crimea is not going back to Ukraine. It's just a fact of life. That's where we are. And this bloody war must end, but end in a way that stops Putin ever doing it again. And I think all of that is beginning to take shape.
So that punch-up in the White House is always going to happen?
Looking back on it, yes.
Why?
Maybe not quite as spectacularly as it did.
Why did you know the man? Why did Trump want a dust-up?
I don't think.
Does he like a fight? Does he prefer a fight to a feast?
Sometimes it's only after a fight you get good reconciliation. And I'm sure many times in his business dealings he's had terrible rows with people, only 48 hours later to sign an agreement.
I thought he was quite harsh about President Zelenskyy, actually.
He was, wasn't he?
Very quite, said he should have worn a suit. He said if you're going in to the White House, Zelenskyy should have thought about that. There are times to wear it and times not to do so. I thought that he was quite punchy on that, and essentially, wouldn't criticise Donald Trump in any way, but went completely in for Zelenskyy, saying, he hadn't prepared, he wasn't ready for a peace deal, and then he should be going straight back to the White House. Also saying he should have elections as soon as possible, and that's something that the US have floated overnight, that it might be time for Zelenskyy to go.
He cited our Mandy in Washington, Lord Mandelson, who has roughly been saying the same sort of thing, hasn't he? He can see a means by which President Zelenskyy will return to Washington.
Yeah, I think everybody is quite hopeful that they can see a scenario. And Zelenskyy told LBC's Andrew Marr last night that he does, he will go back to the US if he's invited back. And it doesn't feel like that's imminent, of course, but he's saying that he will do that if he can. The last thing I think that Nigel Farage said that was really significant was on Crimea. It seemed to be implicating that he feels that Crimea is essentially lost, that is never territory that is going back to Ukraine. And that is a very active debate that's happening in Europe right now. You heard, like we spoke about earlier, von der Leyen saying one thing, and the Americans overnight saying, well, actually, we do believe that they've got to make some really big concessions at some point here to do this peace deal.
Lastly, Natasha, it's only after a good fight you have a reconciliation. Natasha Clark, how do you want to respond to that line from Nigel Farage about Donald Trump?
It's time to kiss and make up. That's what they say. And look, I do think that that's fair. 2 weeks ago, Donald Trump and President Zelenskyy were trading blows across the ocean about whether he was a dictator or not.
Yep. Did I say that?
Did I say that? A week later, they're about to sign a minerals deal. That table was laid out in the White House, ready for that press conference. A table was there, ready for the signing. I genuinely do think that we can still come back from this and that President Zelenskyy might sign that minerals deal.